Montana Territory, 1878. The wind howled through Rattlesnake Valley like a soul in torment, matching the storm brewing inside Xavier Thornton. At 25, he had already weathered more hardship than most men twice his age. The fresh grave on the eastern slope of his property was testament to that. His father, taken by pneumonia just 3 months prior. Now the responsibility of the struggling cattle ranch fell squarely on his young shoulders. Xavier stood on the porch of the modest 2-bedroom homestead, watching storm clouds gather over the distant mountains. His lean frame was silhouetted against the darkening sky, strong hands gripping the weathered railing as he surveyed the land that was now solely his burden. "A man stands alone in this wilderness," he muttered to himself, repeating the words his father had drilled into him since childhood. "Trust no one but yourself, and you're gone. Anything else gets you killed." He believed those words with every fiber of his being. The frontier had taken his mother when he was just 8, then his father, and now threatened to take the ranch too. There was no room for softness out here, no place for the companionship he sometimes ached for in the dead of night. He had convinced himself that loneliness was the price of survival in Montana Territory. Xavier ran a hand through his sandy brown hair, cut short and practical, though a stubborn lock always fell across his forehead. His face was handsome in a rugged way, strong jawline, straight nose, and eyes the color of a summer sky. But those eyes rarely smiled anymore. The neighboring ranchers called him the young hermit, and he did little to discourage the nickname. Better to be left alone than to invite disappointment. What Xavier wanted was simple: to make the ranch profitable enough to keep the bank at bay and preserve his father's legacy. What he needed, though he would never admit it, was something to fill the hollow emptiness that echoed through the too-quiet house each night. As the first fat raindrops began to fall, Xavier headed inside. The approaching storm would be a bad one, and he had a barn full of livestock to secure before it hit full force. Little did he know that this storm would bring more than just rain to Rattlesnake Valley. The downpour came suddenly, transforming the dirt road into a river of mud. 20-year-old Hope Prescott clutched her sodden shawl tighter around her shoulders, squinting through the deluge. Her dark blue dress, once her Sunday best, was now plastered to her slender frame, and her honey-blonde hair hung in dripping ropes down her back. "Just a bit further, Maple," she urged her exhausted mare, who trudged onward with drooping head. There must be shelter somewhere. 3 days on the run from Blackwell, the man who had promised to marry her only to reveal his true nature as a violent gambler who saw her as property to be claimed. 3 days of looking over her shoulder, sleeping in clearings off the trail, and rationing the meager supplies she'd hastily packed. Hope had fled Helena with only what she could carry and the small allowance her late parents had left her. Freedom had been worth the risk, but now, as thunder cracked overhead and lightning split the sky, she wondered if she would survive to enjoy it. Through the curtain of rain, a structure materialized, a large barn, solid and weatherproof. Hope nearly sobbed with relief. She guided Maple toward it, praying it wasn't abandoned or, worse, occupied by someone who would turn her away. The barn door was secured with a simple latch, which Hope managed to open despite her trembling hands. Inside, the air was warm and thick with the smell of hay and horses. Several stalls lined one wall, occupied by curious equine faces. A small lantern hung from a post, casting just enough light for her to see. "Hello," she called out, but only the whicker of horses answered her. Hope tended to Maple first, finding an empty stall and removing the mare's saddle. She rubbed the horse down with handfuls of hay, whispering apologies and promises. Only then did she see to herself, wringing out her dress and hair as best she could. The day's journey and the struggle against the storm had drained what little strength she had left. Hope climbed into the hayloft, spread her shawl out to dry, and curled up in the sweet-smelling hay. She would rest, just for a moment, before seeking the barn's owner to ask permission to stay the night. Sleep claimed her instantly, the first real rest she'd had since fleeing Helena. Xavier secured the last of the cattle in the corral adjacent to the barn, his clothes soaked through despite the oilskin duster he wore. The wind drove the rain sideways, stinging his face like needles. By the time he reached the barn, night had fallen completely. He frowned as he approached. The door was unlatched, swinging slightly in the wind. Had he forgotten to secure it earlier? No, Xavier was meticulous about such things. Someone had been here. Drawing his Colt revolver, he pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The horses were settled, showing no signs of distress. Nothing seemed disturbed or missing. Still, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. A small sound from above caught his attention, a sigh, perhaps, or the rustle of movement. Xavier raised his lantern, illuminating the hayloft. There, curled like a child in the straw, lay a woman. Her honey-blonde hair spilled around her like a halo, and even in sleep, her face held a tension that spoke of troubles. His first instinct was anger. Trespassers meant trouble, especially women. Women meant complications, attachments, weakness. Everything his father had warned him against. But as he watched her sleep, something else stirred in him. A memory of his mother reading to him by lamplight, of warmth and safety before the frontier had stripped those comforts away. The woman looked half-drowned and thoroughly exhausted. Whatever her story, turning her out into the storm seemed needlessly cruel. Xavier holstered his gun and cleared his throat loudly. The woman startled awake, scrambling backward until she hit the wall of the loft. Wide hazel eyes, flecked with gold, stared down at him in terror. "This is private property," he said, keeping his voice level. "You're trespassing." I'm sorry," she stammered, gathering her still damp shawl around her shoulders. "The storm. I had nowhere else to go. I'll leave immediately." She moved to climb down from the loft, but her foot slipped on the damp wood. Xavier moved instinctively, positioning himself beneath her as she fell. She landed in his arms with a small cry, her body light despite the sodden clothing. For a moment, they were frozen, her in his arms, him looking down into a face that seemed both frightened and defiant. He set her down carefully. "You'll catch your death going back out in that weather." "I don't wish to impose," she said, backing toward the door, though her eyes darted longingly to Maple's stall. Xavier knew he should send her on her way. Strangers brought trouble, especially young, beautiful women who appeared out of nowhere during storms. But the wind howled outside, rattling the barn walls, and he found himself saying words that surprised even him. "My house has room for two." Hope stared at the tall, solemn-faced cowboy, trying to gauge his intentions. His eyes were startlingly blue against his weather-tanned skin, and though his expression was guarded, there was no malice in it. Still, she had trusted easily before, and that trust had nearly cost her everything. "I don't even know your name," she said cautiously. "Xavier Thornton. This is my ranch." He gestured around them. "And you are?" "Hope Prescott." She hesitated before adding, "I'm traveling to Virginia City. My cousin lives there." The lie felt awkward on her tongue, but she wasn't ready to share her true circumstances with a stranger. Xavier seemed to consider this. Virginia City is still 2 days' ride in good weather. He looked toward the door, where rain continued to pour down in sheets. "This storm isn't letting up anytime soon. You can stay in the house tonight. There's a spare room." The offer was tempting, a real bed, a roof that didn't leak, maybe even hot food. But Hope had learned to be wary of men's generosity. "What would you want in return?" she asked bluntly, chin raised in defiance despite her vulnerable position. Something flashed in Xavier's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or respect. "Nothing. I'm not in the habit of leaving people to drown." He reached for a horse blanket hanging nearby. "Here. It's dry at least." Hope accepted the blanket, wrapping it around her shoulders. The simple kindness nearly undid her. After days of fear and desperate flight, even this small comfort felt overwhelming. "Thank you," she whispered. Xavier nodded once, then turned to check on the horses. "I'll finish here. Take the lantern and head to the house. It's just across the yard." Doors unlocked. Hope gathered her meager belongings and stepped out into the rain, which had lessened somewhat, but still fell steadily. The lantern light revealed a modest homestead nestled against a stand of pines, smoke curling from the stone chimney. It looked solid and safe, if somewhat neglected. Inside, a fire burned low in the hearth. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a sturdy table, a few chairs, and a worn armchair facing the fire. Everything was clean but sparse, as if the occupant saw little need for comfort beyond the essentials. Hope stood dripping on the wooden floor, unsure what to do with herself. After a few minutes, Xavier entered, removing his duster and hanging it by the door. Without the coat, She could see how his shoulders filled out his simple cotton shirt, how his movements held a graceful economy born of physical work. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps only a few years older than herself. "The spare room is through there," he said, pointing to a door off the main room. "It was my father's. No one's used it since he passed." "I'm sorry for your loss," Hope said softly. Xavier's expression tightened. "It was 3 months ago. Pneumonia." He moved to the stove and stoked the fire beneath a pot that hung there. "There's stew, and I can heat water for you to wash up." As he busied himself with practical matters, Hope retreated to the bedroom he had indicated. It was plain but clean, with a bed covered in a faded quilt, a dresser, and a small table with a basin. She changed into her spare dress, hardly better than the wet one, but at least dry, and tried to bring some order to her tangled hair. When she emerged, Xavier had set 2 bowls of stew on the table, along with a loaf of bread that looked homemade, if a bit misshapen. "You bake?" she asked, surprised. "Badly," he admitted. "But it's bread." They ate in silence for a while, the only sounds the clink of spoons against bowls and the steady drumming of rain on the roof. Hope was ravenous, having subsisted on jerky and foraged berries for days. "Where are you really running from?" Xavier asked suddenly. Hope's spoon halted halfway to her mouth. "I told you. I'm going to visit. No one travels alone in this weather unless they're running from something worse." His gaze was direct. "I'm not asking for details. Just the truth of whether I should be watching for someone following you." The stew suddenly felt heavy in Hope's stomach. "I left Helena 3 days ago. There was a man. I thought he wanted to marry me, but he only wanted to own me." She put down her spoon, appetite gone. "When I refused him, he became violent. I slipped away while he was gambling." "Does he know which direction you headed?" Hope shook her head. "I don't think so. I told the stagecoach driver I was heading north to Great Falls, then doubled back south when he wasn't looking." Xavier nodded slowly. "Smart, though risky to travel alone." "Less risky than staying," she said firmly. Something in his expression shifted, a glimmer of respect, perhaps. "You're welcome to stay until the storm passes. After that," he left the sentence unfinished. "After that, I'll continue to Virginia City," Hope said. There was no cousin waiting for her, but she had enough money saved to perhaps secure work as a seamstress or schoolteacher. Anything to build a life where she made her own choices. Later, as she lay in the unfamiliar bed listening to the storm rage outside, Hope found herself wondering about the solitary young rancher who had offered shelter to a stranger. His home spoke of loneliness. No feminine touches, no family photographs, just the bare necessities of frontier living. Yet he had shown her kindness without expecting anything in return. In the other room, Xavier sat before the dying fire, equally unable to sleep. The woman's presence had disrupted the careful isolation he had built around himself. Already, the house felt different, less empty, more alive somehow. It unsettled him. Temporary, he reminded himself. Once the storm passed, she would move on, and life would return to its solitary rhythm. That was for the best. The frontier was no place for attachments. His father had taught him that lesson well. Still, as he finally drifted off in the armchair, Xavier found himself wondering what color Hope's eyes might be in sunlight. Morning brought clear skies and the realization that the storm had done significant damage to the ranch. A section of fence was down, allowing several cattle to wander dangerously close to Rattlesnake Creek's swollen banks. The barn roof had a new leak, and the vegetable garden Xavier had grudgingly maintained was partially flooded. Hope emerged from the bedroom to find him pulling on his boots, face grim as he cataloged the work ahead. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "Storm damage. I need to round up some strays before they drown themselves in the creek." He reached for his hat. "There's coffee on the stove. Help yourself." "Let me help," Hope said impulsively. "I grew up around horses. I can ride." Xavier gave her a skeptical look. "This isn't a social outing. It's ranch work." "I'm stronger than I look," she insisted. "And I owe you for the shelter." He hesitated, clearly torn between his need for assistance and his instinct to keep her at arm's length. Finally, practicality won out. "Can you mend?" "The barn roof needs patching." "I can mend anything with a needle and thread," Hope said confidently, "though I've never tackled a roof before." For the first time, a hint of a smile touched Xavier's lips. "I'll handle the roof. If you could mend the torn grain sacks in the storage room, that would help." And so began an unexpected partnership. While Xavier rounded up strays and repaired fence lines, Hope tackled the grain sacks, then moved on to organizing the chaotic storage room. She found a broom and swept the house, discovered vegetables salvageable from the garden, and by afternoon had a pot of soup simmering on the stove. When Xavier returned, mud-splattered and weary, the transformation of his house stopped him in his tracks. The floor was swept, the clutter organized, and the air filled with the aroma of cooking food rather than dust and disuse. "You didn't have to do all this," he said, removing his hat and running a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. "I wanted to earn my keep," Hope replied. "Besides, it gave me something to do besides worry." As they shared the soup and more of Xavier's questionable bread that evening, conversation came easier than it had the night before. Hope learned that Xavier had lived on the ranch his entire life, that his mother had died from influenza when he was young, and that his father had raised him with an iron hand and few words of affection. He wasn't cruel, Xavier clarified, just hard. He believed the frontier would destroy anyone who showed weakness. "And do you believe that too?" Hope asked. Xavier's gaze met hers across the table. "I believe the frontier is indifferent. It doesn't care about weakness or strength. It just is. Then perhaps how we survive it is up to us," Hope suggested. That night, Xavier insisted Hope take the bed again while he slept in the armchair. As she drifted off to sleep, Hope realized that for the first time in months, she hadn't looked over her shoulder once that day. Somehow, in this stranger's home, she felt safer than she had in a long time. The next day brought more ranch work and more unexpected revelations. While helping Xavier muck out the horse stalls, Hope mentioned her love of reading. "My father was a bookseller," she explained. "Our home was filled with books. When he and mother died of typhoid, I had to sell most of them to settle their debts, but I kept a few favorites." Her voice softened with memory. "I used to dream of running my own bookshop someday." Xavier paused his work, leaning on his pitchfork. "My mother loved books too. There's a trunk of them in the attic. Father never had the heart to get rid of them after she died." That evening, they retrieved the trunk, a dusty cedar chest filled with well-worn volumes of poetry, novels, and illustrated natural histories. Hope handled each book reverently, while Xavier watched her with an expression of puzzled fascination, as if rediscovering these treasures through her eyes. "Would you read something?" he asked unexpectedly. "My mother used to read aloud in the evenings. I had almost forgotten." Hope selected a volume of Tennyson's poems, and as the fire crackled in the hearth, she read Ulysses in a clear, expressive voice. Xavier sat in his father's chair, eyes closed, the hard lines of his face softening as the words filled the room that had known only silence for too long. That night, he dreamed of his mother's voice for the first time in years. Days passed, and still the creek ran too high for safe crossing. What had begun as a single night's shelter extended into nearly a week. Each day, Hope found new ways to make herself useful. Cooking, mending, even helping Xavier doctor an injured calf. Each night, they shared meals and conversation that gradually grew deeper. "Why did you really leave, Helena?" Xavier asked on the fifth night, as they sat before the fire. "There's more to the story than a suitor turned violent, isn't there?" Hope stared into the flames. "His name was Victor Blackwell. He came to Helena with grand plans to open a gambling house. He courted me publicly, charmed my landlady, made promises about the future." Her hands twisted in her lap. "But in private, he was different. Controlling, demanding. When I refused to accommodate his desires before marriage, he became angry." Xavier's jaw tightened. "Did he hurt you?" "He tried," Hope said quietly. "I fought back, broke a vase over his head when he tried to force himself on me. That's when I realized I had to leave. He has influence in Helena. People listen to him, not to an orphan girl with no family connections." "You're safe here," Xavier said, the words coming unbidden. He hadn't meant to say them, hadn't meant to imply she could stay beyond the immediate necessity. Yet as the words hung in the air between them, he realized he meant them. Hope looked up, meeting his gaze. "Thank you for saying that. But we both know I can't stay forever." The sixth day dawned clear and warm. Xavier checked the creek and found it had receded enough for safe crossing. He returned to the house with the news, expecting to feel relief that things could return to normal. Instead, he felt a strange hollowness at the thought of Hope leaving. Hope took the news with quiet dignity, though Xavier thought he glimpsed disappointment in her eyes as well. "I'll pack my things," she said. "And I'll need to see about Maple." "I've been thinking," Xavier said slowly. "The trail to Virginia City passes through some rough country. Outlaws sometimes target lone travelers." He cleared his throat. "I have business in Bannack, which is on the way. I could accompany you. For safety." Hope's eyes widened. "You would do that?" "It's just practical," he said quickly. "I need supplies anyway, and the cattle can manage for a few days." But they both knew it was more than practicality. In less than a week, Hope had brought life and light back into a house that had known only grief and loneliness. And Xavier had shown Hope that not all men were like Victor Blackwell, that kindness could exist without ulterior motives. That evening, as they prepared for the journey ahead, Xavier found Hope standing on the porch, gazing at the sunset that painted the valley in shades of gold and crimson. He joined her, maintaining a respectful distance. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. "Your own little kingdom." "It doesn't feel much like a kingdom most days," he admitted. "Just endless work and worry." Hope turned to him, her face serious. "Why do you stay? If it brings you so little joy?" The question caught him off guard. No one had ever asked him that before. "It's what I know," he said finally. "It's what my father built. What he expected me to continue." "Is that enough reason to spend your life alone?" Xavier looked away, unable to meet her gaze. "My father believed attachment was weakness, that caring for others made a man vulnerable out here." "And what do you believe, Xavier?" Her voice was gentle but insistent. "I don't know anymore," he said honestly. "A week ago, I would have agreed with him without hesitation. Now," he glanced at her, at the way the sunset gilded her honey-blonde hair and illuminated the hope in her name. "Now I'm not so sure." The journey to Virginia City would take 3 days. They set out early the following morning, Xavier leading the way on his stallion, Ranger, with Hope following on Maple. The trail wound through pine forests and open meadows dappled with wildflowers. It was a perfect late spring day, with birdsong filling the air and no hint of the storms that had brought them together. As they rode, Xavier found himself pointing out landmarks, sharing stories of his childhood explorations that he had never told anyone. Hope listened eagerly, offering stories of her own, of growing up surrounded by books, of her parents' love for each other and for her, of her dreams for a future that had seemed impossible in Helena, but now felt within reach again. They made camp that evening in a sheltered grove near a small stream. As Xavier built a fire, Hope arranged their bedrolls on opposite sides of the flames, close enough for safety, far enough for propriety. The gesture wasn't lost on Xavier. Hope was showing him that she respected his space, even as they drew closer in other ways. Over a simple supper of beans and bacon, Hope asked about Xavier's plans for the ranch. "The bank holds a note that comes due next spring," he admitted. "My father took out a loan 2 years ago when the drought killed half our herd. I'm not sure I can make the payment." "What will you do if you can't?" Xavier poked at the fire. "I don't know. Start over somewhere else, I suppose." "Would that be so terrible?" Hope asked gently. "To begin again?" He looked up, meeting her gaze across the flames. "It would mean my father's dream died with him, that I failed. Or it could mean you're free to find your own dream," she suggested. The second day of travel brought them to a small settlement where they stopped to water the horses. While Hope waited outside the general store, a stranger approached her, a well-dressed man with a calculating smile. "Pardon me, miss," he said, "but might your name be Hope Prescott?" Hope's blood ran cold. "Who's asking?" "An acquaintance of mine in Helena mentioned a young lady of your description." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Victor Blackwell sends his regards. He's been quite concerned about your sudden departure." Before Hope could respond, Xavier appeared at her side, his hand resting casually near his holstered revolver. "Is there a problem here?" The stranger's smile faltered. "No problem at all. Just passing on greetings from a mutual friend." "We have no friends in common," Xavier said coldly. "Move along." The man tipped his hat and retreated, but the damage was done. As they rode out of town, Hope's hands trembled on the reins. "He found me," she whispered. "Victor knows where I am." "He knows you passed through," Xavier corrected. "That's all. By the time any message reaches him, we'll be in Virginia City." He guided Ranger closer to Maple. "I won't let him hurt you, Hope." That night, Hope couldn't sleep. Every sound in the darkness seemed like approaching danger. When Xavier found her sitting by the dying fire, arms wrapped around herself, He didn't hesitate to sit beside her. "Talk to me," he said simply. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not just of Victor, but of everything. I have no family, little money, and no certainty waiting for me in Virginia City. Just hope that somehow I can build a life there." "You're the bravest person I've ever met," Xavier said suddenly. "Most people would have stayed in Helena, accepted a bad situation because it was familiar. You chose the unknown because you believed you deserved better." Hope looked at him in surprise. "I never thought of it as brave. My father would have called it foolish," Xavier said with a wry smile. "But I think he was wrong about a lot of things." They sat in companionable silence, shoulders almost touching. When Hope finally spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't want to go to Virginia City," she confessed. "I have no cousin there, no connections at all. I chose it because it was far from Helena, that's all." Xavier turned to look at her, his face half in shadow, half illuminated by the glowing embers. "Where do you want to go, Hope?" She met his gaze steadily. "I don't know yet, but these past days at your ranch, I felt peaceful, useful, like I belonged somewhere for the first time since my parents died." Xavier's heart hammered in his chest. He wanted to tell her she could belong there permanently, that the house had never felt so much like a home as when she was in it. But the words wouldn't come. His father's warnings echoed too loudly in his mind. Instead, he said, "You have time to figure it out. No need to rush." But time was exactly what they didn't have. The third day of travel brought them within sight of Virginia City, its buildings clustered in the valley below them. They paused on the ridge, both reluctant to continue. "Well," Hope said, attempting a smile, "you fulfilled your promise. Safely delivered." Xavier nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'll see you settled at the hotel before I head to Bannack." As they rode into town, neither spoke of the unspoken words hanging between them. Xavier secured a room for Hope at the respectable widow's boarding house, paid for a week in advance despite her protests, and promised to check on her when he returned from Bannack in 3 days. Their goodbye was awkward, constrained by the presence of the curious landlady and Xavier's own inability to express the turmoil inside him. He tipped his hat, said a formal "safe travels, Miss Prescott," and rode away, feeling as though he were leaving something vital behind. The road to Bannack seemed longer and emptier than ever before. Xavier found himself talking to Ranger, something he rarely did. "Father would say I'm being a fool," he told the horse. "That attachment leads to grief. That the frontier is no place for sentimentality." Ranger snorted, as if in disagreement. "But she brought life back to that house," Xavier continued. "Made it more than just walls and a roof." He fell silent for a long moment. "I never realized how lonely I was until she showed me I didn't have to be." His business in Bannack took less time than expected. The supply order was quickly placed, and he found himself with a day to spare before returning to Virginia City. It was then that he heard the news. A notorious gambler from Helena had arrived in Virginia City, asking questions about a young blonde woman traveling alone. Xavier rode through the night, pushing Ranger harder than he ever had before. Fear clawed at his throat. Fear that he had left Hope unprotected, that his father's warnings about attachment making a man weak would prove true in the worst possible way. Dawn was breaking as he thundered into Virginia City. The boarding house was quiet, but the landlady was already up, startled by his urgent knocking. "Miss Prescott," he demanded. "Is she here?" "Left yesterday," the woman said, eyeing him suspiciously. "With her fiancé, tall fellow, well-dressed. Said there had been a misunderstanding between them." Xavier's blood ran cold. "Which way did they go?" "North Road. Headed back toward Helena, I believe." The landlady frowned. "Is something wrong?" He had papers showing they were engaged. Xavier was already running back to Ranger. Victor Blackwell had found Hope, and somehow forced or tricked her into going with him. The North Road would take them through desolate country before reaching any settlement. If he rode hard, cutting across country instead of following the road, he might intercept them. As he pushed Ranger to his limits, Xavier confronted the truth he had been avoiding. He loved Hope Prescott, loved her quiet strength, her gentleness, her courage in the face of uncertainty. And if his father was right, if that love made him vulnerable, then so be it. Some things were worth the risk. Miles ahead, Hope sat rigidly on Maple, Victor Blackwell's horse tethered to hers with a lead rope. The gun he had pressed against her side last night at the boarding house was now holstered, but his threat remained clear: cooperate or he would track down that cowboy, and kill him. You'll learn to appreciate me, Hope, Victor said smoothly. I'm not an unreasonable man. We'll have a good life in Helena once you accept your place. Hope said nothing. She was watching the trail, calculating distances, waiting for any opportunity. Victor might have a gun, but he had underestimated her once before. She wouldn't let Xavier die because of her, the man who had shown her kindness without demanding anything in return. The moment came when Victor dismounted to check something on his horse's hoof. As soon as his back was turned, Hope kicked Maple into a gallop, yanking hard on the lead rope to startle Victor's horse. The animal reared, breaking free from Victor's grip. Hope, he bellowed behind her. A shot rang out, going wide. Hope rode as if demons pursued her, which in a way, they did. She had no plan beyond escape, no destination except away from Victor. When a rider appeared on the trail ahead, her heart sank, until she recognized the familiar figure on the big bay stallion. Xavier, she cried out. He wheeled Ranger toward her, his face transforming from grim determination to relief, then back to alertness as he spotted the rider pursuing her. In one smooth motion, Xavier drew his revolver. Stay behind me, he ordered as Hope reached him. Victor Blackwell reined in his horse, his handsome face contorted with rage. This doesn't concern you, cowboy. The lady and I have an understanding. The only understanding, Xavier said coldly, is that you're going to turn around and ride back to Helena. Now, Victor's hand hovered near his gun. She belongs to me. She belongs to herself, Xavier countered. And she's made her choice clear. For a tense moment, it seemed Victor would draw. His eyes, calculating and cold, assessed Xavier. Whatever he saw there, the steady hand, the unwavering gaze, the absolute certainty, made him reconsider. This isn't over, he spat, but turned his horse away nonetheless. I have connections in every town from here to Salt Lake. You'll never be safe. Then we'll make our own safety, Xavier replied. Far from men like you. They watched until Victor was out of sight. Then Xavier turned to Hope, his eyes searching her face. Did he hurt you? She shook her head. No. He threatened you. Said he'd kill you if I didn't go with him. Tears welled in her eyes. I couldn't let that happen. Not because of me. Xavier dismounted and approached her, reaching up to help her down from Maple. When her feet touched the ground, he didn't step back. Instead, his hands gently cupped her face, thumbs brushing away tears. I rode all night thinking I might lose you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Thinking of all the things I should have said before I left you in Virginia City. Hope's heart hammered against her ribs. What things? That in 1 week, you changed everything. That my house has room for two, not just for a night or during a storm, but forever. His blue eyes held hers, vulnerable and certain all at once. That I love you, Hope Prescott. The words hung between them, weightless and profound. Hope reached up, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, feeling the slight stubble there. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have since you found me sleeping in your barn. Their first kiss was gentle, a promise exchanged without words. When they broke apart, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. We don't have to go back to the ranch, he said. We could start fresh somewhere else, if that's what you want. Hope smiled, her first real smile since they had parted in Virginia City. The ranch is your home, and I think it could be mine too. It's just a place, Xavier said. You're my home now. They returned to Rattlesnake Valley as the summer sun painted the mountains gold. The house waited for them, no longer empty, no longer merely shelter from the elements. As they stood on the porch, hand in hand, Xavier saw the ranch through new eyes, not as a burden or a legacy, but as a beginning. Welcome home, he said, and opened the door to their future. By winter, the house had transformed. Curtains hung in the windows, books filled the once empty shelves, and the sound of laughter had replaced the silence. Hope had turned one corner of the main room into a small library, offering books to the children of neighboring ranches. Xavier had found joy in the work again, no longer isolated with his worries, but sharing them with a partner who believed in possibilities. Christmas Eve found them seated before the fire, a small pine tree decorated with paper stars and candles standing in the corner. Outside, snow fell gently, blanketing the valley in pristine white. I have something for you, Xavier said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small wooden box, carved with intricate patterns. I've been working on it for weeks. Hope opened it to find a gold band nestled inside. Xavier, she breathed. I know we've only had half a year together, he said, suddenly nervous. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Will you marry me, Hope? Make this arrangement permanent. Yes, she said without hesitation. 1,000 times yes. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Hope thought of the storm that had driven her to his barn, of the young cowboy who had found her sleeping there and opened not just his house, but his heart. The frontier had tried to teach them both that survival meant isolation, that love was a liability in a harsh land. But together, they had discovered a different truth, that love wasn't weakness at all, but the greatest strength the wilderness could ever know. My house has room for two, Xavier had said that first night. But what they had built together was so much more than a house. It was a home, filled with love that would endure long after the frontier had been tamed. Outside, the snow continued to fall on Rattlesnake Valley, covering all in a blanket of peace. And inside, by the warmth of the fire, Hope and Xavier embraced their future together.